Hello, my friends. I have a question for you. What is at the heart of astrology? Is it an archetypal language? Venus is the archetype of beauty, a mythic story, an essential quality that takes on different characteristics and qualities depending on the signs and houses and aspects that Venus makes. And Mars is the warrior, etc., etc. Is somehow a mythic language embedded into the fabric of the universe. That's a wild idea to modern science. But is that what's going on? That's what a lot of modern astrologers say. Is astrology primarily divination? Or maybe the divinatory side of astrology comes out when you do certain things and the archetypal language comes out in other things? Are there other aspects to astrology? What is it? What is this thing that we astrologers are doing? What's at the heart of it? Or can it even be explained? Or will it always be a mystery? What do you think? And what is at the heart of astronomy? Well, it seems like it's careful observations. People are looking through their telescopes, taking notes, observing what's happening, putting it together. Is that the core thing? Well, I'm going to tell you in the next slide what I think is at the heart of astrology and what is at the heart of astronomy. You can think about it. You can pause this video if you want. I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to go into some detail about why I think this. I think you'll find it fascinating. Very, very interesting. Okay, so here it is. I think that at the heart of both astrology and astronomy are the same things. Two things: geometry and vibration. Whoa, how is geometry at the heart of astrology? Well, you can imagine a few ways, but is it really the heart? The core? Everything's emanating? Everything's born out of geometry and vibration? And astronomy doesn't seem that way. Oh, but I'm going to show you. Let's start with the astronomy. Why I say geometry and vibration is at the heart of astrology and astronomy. There's a start anyway. How do planets move? And satellites, like the moons of planets, like our moon. How do they travel? Well, you've heard, they travel in ellipses. But think about it. What is an ellipse? An ellipse is a perfect geometric shape. It's a circle. Take a circle. And then you stretch the circle and you end up with 2 points instead of 1. It's like a circle that's made binary. It's like a circle with a kind of yin-yang quality, with this kind of bipolar kind of quality to it. It's a pure geometric form that can be described with formulas. And on the left are the actual orbits of Mercury and Venus. This is to scale. This is what they actually look like. And notice this orange dot, which is the sun, is not in the center of the path of Mercury. It actually is very close to the center of the orbit of Venus. And that's because Venus has an almost circular orbit, whereas Mercury's is more stretched out. So all planets travel in an ellipse, this kind of egg shape. But some planets have a skinnier, longer shape, and some are closer to being perfectly round. So an ellipse can be close to being a perfect circle or more stretched out. It's still an ellipse. The formula for an ellipse allows for different, you might say, thicknesses. And Mercury has a very stretched out orbit, as opposed to Venus, which is nearly round. And when the orbit is stretched out like this, we call it a high eccentricity. The sun, the center point that's going around, is not in the center. There are actually 2 center points, and one of them is, or we call them focal points, and one of them is the actual sun. So that's Mercury and Venus. Similar, here's Uranus and Pluto. Uranus, like Venus, has low eccentricity, almost a perfect circle. And so you see that sun of the dot, it looks like a circle. It's almost a perfect circle. Pluto is similar to Mercury, very eccentric and stretched out. And when the orbit is eccentric, it means not close to being a circle, then the sun, or whatever object the planet is going around, is off to one side, not in the center. And that's what's going on with Pluto. The planets travel in a perfect geometric shape. And planets will slow down and their orbits will change a little bit when another planet comes near it by the gravity. And you know what the gravity does? It changes the ellipse. It changes the shape of the ellipse. The planets are always in a perfect ellipse. It's rather extraordinary that the physical world is following a pure geometry. That's what's actually going on. And in fact, who discovered these laws of planetary motion? Kepler. How did he discover them? He discovered them because he had this intuition. He had this belief that there's a geometry behind nature. That's what he believed. And he was looking for it. And first, he thought it might be what are called Platonic solids. He thought the orbits of the planets fit within these Platonic solids. He just had this vision that the physical world must be following some kind of pure geometry. It's not how we think today. It's not what we think of as science, but that's what Kepler was thinking. So he developed this theory that these things called Platonic solids, there are 5 of them. 5 shapes, 3-dimensional shapes, where 2-dimensional shapes are repeated over and over again and nothing else. So a cube is made up of squares. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares. And this thing called an octahedron has these triangles, and every triangle looks identical. And there are 5 of them, and only 5. And they knew this, back when Kepler was alive and before that. So let's read from the slide. Kepler discovered the laws of motion because he was looking for the geometry behind the manifest world. This is what he was consciously doing. That's what he was looking for. And to quote from a Wikipedia article, he developed a theory that planetary orbits were arranged by the 5 Platonic solids. Mysterium Cosmographicum, if we translate that, literally the cosmographic mystery, sometimes translated as the cosmic mystery, the secret of the world, is another translation. He thought he found this mysterious secret of the world, and he published it in Tübingen, Germany in 1596. Another edition came out in 1621. Kepler proposed that the distance relationships between the 6 planets known at the time could be understood in terms of the 5 Platonic solids enclosed within a sphere that represents the orbit of Saturn. So he was looking for this sacred geometry that somehow the physical world, he just felt it must be based on some pure geometry. That was his belief. And he wanted to find it. That was his first theory. So he discovered the laws of motion because he was looking for that geometry. So when I say that geometry is at the heart of astronomy, that's how the first laws of astronomy were developed, was by Kepler. He was the first one because that's what he was looking for. Here's another quote from Wikipedia. Kepler thought he had revealed God's geometrical plan for the universe. Much of Kepler's enthusiasm for the Copernican system stemmed from his theological convictions about the connection between the physical and the spiritual. Kepler started off thinking he was going to go into the ministry. He had this sense of a spiritual force behind nature. And somehow he came up with this idea, well, it's an ancient idea. It's not that mysterious. This idea of a sacred geometry, of a geometry behind nature. He felt in his heart it must be true. He thought it was the 5 Platonic solids. He thought he discovered it. But, to read from this slide, planetary distances have not been confirmed to be related to the Platonic solids. Then Kepler found another geometry upon which the physical world is created. Planets travel in perfect ellipses. So he tried different kinds of geometry that must be behind nature, and he found it. And that was the breakthrough. The breakthrough that started the science of astronomy and being able to predict where planetary positions are. When the orbit of the second paragraph I've already covered. So over 400 years ago, Kepler had the intuition that the physical world is built on a geometry which we can call sacred geometry. And there's this geometry that exists behind things. And this is often overlooked, or people see it as incidental. They say, oh, well, Kepler, he happened to be into this mystical stuff, and, as if it was not directly related to what his discoveries. Oh, it was directly related. He would not have made the discoveries if he didn't have this idea, because he was looking for the geometry. It was there, and he found it. And that's how he discovered the laws of planetary motion. And here's what he wrote. This is really almost unbelievable. This is in the book Harmonici Mundi. This is quoted by Arthur Kiesler in his book The Sleepwalkers, that was published in 1959. And he quotes Kepler as saying, geometry existed before the creation, is co-eternal with the mind of God, is God himself. What exists in God that is not God himself? Geometry provided God with a model for the creation and was implanted into man. Wow. So in the beginning was geometry. God used geometry to create the physical world. Implanted into man means that we human beings have the capacity to discover these things, to see these things, that we have an intelligence to be able to recognize this. You can't say it any clearer than that. So when I say astronomy is based on geometry and vibration, I think this makes it a little clearer why I'm saying that. This is how astronomy was born. And the vibration part is when astronomers are making all these observations, looking through telescopes, they're looking at the light or other electromagnetic radiation which travels in waves. Those are vibrations. They can decode those wavelengths and figure out what chemical elements make up an object. It's called spectroscopy. This analysis of vibration, of seeing things. A lot of people say everything is fundamentally vibration. So, yes, astronomy is careful observations of what? Of the geometry and the vibration. And that realization is what has propelled, following that path, is what's propelled astronomy forward. Now, modern scientists, they like to keep religion and science separate from each other. They focus almost exclusively on the evidence. They leave out everything else, but Kepler was driven to find the geometry that existed before creation, and he found it. If he did not have this belief, then he would not have discovered the laws of planetary motion. And that was the big breakthrough, the first big breakthrough for modern science. And then Newton came along, developed the laws of gravity, etc. So there you have it. And also, it starts with Kepler discovering these laws of motion. And then from there, science builds on the language of mathematics. In 1960, Wigner wrote the article, The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. This is a classic article referred to by scientists all the time. And Wigner writes, the miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the foundation of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve. We should be grateful for it. It's one of the greatest physicists saying that nature operates by the language of mathematics. We don't know why. We don't understand it. We don't, quote, deserve it. It just is. And we should be grateful because of that, we are able to understand how nature works. So behind science is formulas, mathematics. Geometry is part of that mathematics, which is the language of nature. Now, what about astrology? Is astrology, like astronomy, based on geometry and vibration? Well, let's look at some things. Let's take the ascendant, the all-powerful ascendant that's used in Vedic astrology, Hellenistic, medieval, modern psychological. Everybody uses the ascendant. The ascendant is pure geometry. just like the elliptical paths of the planets. Pure geometry. It is where the celestial horizon, this horizon plane, which is abstract geometry, it's a plane, which means a flat surface that's tangent to the surface of the Earth. It means if you took like a board or a glass or something, it would be the point that balances on that curve of the Earth, a tangent. Can be calculated mathematically exactly where it is. The ascendant is where this plane that's tangent to the surface of the Earth intersects and it crosses another plane called the ecliptic plane. These are not physical things. These are not even things that are anything other than pure geometry, just like an ellipse is. Astrology actually preceded the modern sciences in knowing that geometry is behind nature. And Kepler was an astrologer. So a lot of modern scientists look at astrology as a weird superstition. Well, if you know what astrology really is, it uses things like the ascendant, which are pure geometry. In ancient times, they knew spherical trigonometry. They could calculate these things using spherical trigonometry. They understood the pure geometry behind it. And that led Kepler to discover the laws of planetary motion. Astrology was actually an inspiration for the development of modern science. Oh my God. So a modern scientist may think, oh, is this a superstition about the planets affecting you? Well, that's a very simplistic, caricatured view. This is not what was going on. The people who did astrology were among the brightest people around, and especially in the Middle Ages. They were doing this in universities, and the concepts used became a foundation for the development of astronomy. The midheaven, the MC, is the same thing as the ascendant. Pure geometry. Pure geometry. A great, we call it a great circle, a circle, essentially with you in the middle of it, this great circle, defined astronomically and with mathematical formulas, where that intersects the ecliptic plane is the MC and the opposite point is the IC. Pure geometry. So a lot of people say, oh, I like ancient astrology. I like visual astrology. Well, the great astrology of ancient times was not primarily visual. Sorry, but it wasn't. The ascendant is not visual. The MC is not visual. They are mathematical. That's what they are. If you go back to Babylonia, to the divination, that's visual. But that divinatory astrology preceded the revolution, the paradigm shift that went on around the year 400 BC, maybe 500 BC, when the zodiac was identified as having 12 signs of 30 degrees. That didn't happen until much later. And there's evidence in the Rig Veda and other ancient texts that this idea of a pure geometry behind astrology, was there. And that's the foundation of the modern astrology we have, is the pure geometry behind it, just like astronomy. So amazingly, the celestial equator and the meridian plane, which interact with the ecliptic plane to create the ascendant tropical zero Aries, are pure geometry. So tropical zero Aries, just like the midheaven and the ascendant, pure geometry, and it can be considered to be the geometry before creation, to use Kepler's beautiful poetic way of thinking of it. And these ideas of the ascendant and midheaven, I describe this in detail in other videos, they anticipate not only that there's a geometry behind nature, but also the concept of dimension reduction, which is used in string theory and other theories in modern physics. because the ascendant and midheaven are based on this idea, and the tropical zero areas are all based on this idea that we take the entire sphere, a three-dimensional structure, you collapse it into two dimensions, you see where those two dimensions interact, and they create powerful points. Now, I don't see it being explained that way in the ancient literature, but that's what they were doing. And it anticipates this concept of dimension reduction, which comes along much later. So, in a way, astrology is a prototype. It's an original analytical tool which built a foundation for modern science. So some astrologers feel like, oh, science is mechanical, it's materialistic. What I do in astrology is very different. It's a different world. It's more spiritual. That's not the view we have in vibrational astrology. Everything is spiritual. Everything is born out of higher dimensional, glorious things. And all we're doing with science, or art or anything else, is getting a slice into the magic of life. That's what we're doing. Scientists might be, teachers might be, any group of people might be on the whole materialistic or narrow-minded. Don't replace what they're studying with the people. Astrologers might be, the way scientists think of them, the popular astrologers, sort of naive and simplistic in their thinking, perhaps, I don't know. But that's not necessarily what astrology is. So we have projected a lot of crude images on things, when actually what's going on is we live in a magical universe, in which science is a lens into it, art is a lens into it, and what we're looking at is this geometry before creation. Astronomers are doing it, and astrologers are doing it. And all of the archetypal stories are secondary. They're born out of this. Why are we so confident about it? Because just like Kepler did in discovering the laws of motion, and scientists continue to do today, we have developed theories based on understanding astrology as geometry and vibration, new laws, new rules, little threads of ancient ideas that work so well, we validated it with databases. The excitement of working with your clients, it's just exciting. It's a paradigm shift. It's a breakthrough. We're following in the steps of Kepler, and we're seeing that science, mysticism, psychology, they're all one. They're all lenses into the great mystery of life. So astrology, at a minimum, is an early form of investigations that introduce concepts such as a pure geometry as the basis of the physical world. Careful research into astrological theory suggests that the great majority of astrological ideas do not work very well or work at all. Now, astrologers who use lots of ancient ideas may not like that. All I'm saying is we have not been able to confirm those ideas when we go through the database. When we extract out of these ancient traditions certain ideas, like the Saptamsa chart, the Navamsa chart from Vedic astrology, such as the Ptolemaic aspects, and rework them, they're used in Western astrology, rework them within the context of a vibrational system similar to the Vargas and Vedic, we have integrated, pulled, connected, extracted, and developed ideas that are so stunning, that work so well. It's a whole new world, and it all boils down to something very simple. Astrology and astronomy at the heart are geometry and vibration. And all of the wonderful archetypal stories are born out of that. It doesn't minimize their importance. Carl Jung was correct. Carl Jung was looking for an integrated understanding of everything, and we are developing what Jung's dream was and how those archetypal stories are born out of the vibration, out of the geometry, which is the bedrock. It is the source. It is the core. Kepler, who developed the first scientific laws of nature in the laws of motion through his search for geometry, was also right. He found it because his intuition was right. This geometry that exists before creation, that's why we call it, quote, sacred geometry, because it goes back to the source. Okay, additional ways in which astrology is based on sacred geometry. It's not based on a visual thing. It's based on sacred geometry. Here's some examples. Number one, we do not use the parallax corrected position of the moon in astrology. It's also known as the topocentric moon. The moon that we use in astrology is not where the moon is in the sky. The moon we use can be up to 1 degree different from what's in the sky. It's what we use in astrology is not what we see with our eyes. It's based on a pure geometry that transcends what we see with our eyes. So it's the geometry of how the planets are arranged in the sky. This is what we're looking at. We are a part of these cosmic patterns. Astrology is not person-centered. The person is situated in the cosmos. In astrology, we're seeing how you fit within the cosmos. The cosmos is fundamental, not you. You are a part of it. That's why we don't use the parallax-corrected moon. So it's not where the moon is from your point of view. It's from where the moon is from the point of view of the Earth on which we live. So many things we do in astrology are just not visual. They just aren't. So if you're not familiar with the parallax-corrected moon, also known as topocentric moon, I don't think I've made videos about that. Probably another video I need to make that clear what it is. We're not using what we see with our eyes. We're using pure geometry. We're already doing this. Another thing, we do not use refraction of light in astrology. If we use refraction of light, you'd be using our eyes. Some people say, oh, I use ancient astrology. I like visual. Well, they weren't that visual. They were using pure geometry. Some of it is visual. If you go all the way back to Babylonian, especially the divination things going on. But here's what refraction of light is. Here's this little guy here on the planet, and he's looking at at an object, say the sun, either rising or setting. And what happens is the air, the atmosphere around the Earth bends the light. You know when you put your arm in water, it looks like your arm is bent? Excuse me. The light rays bend, especially when they're on the horizon. Not so much when they're over your head, but they bend. And what happens is we see the sun, for example, if it's sunrise or moon or whatever, above the horizon when it's actually below the horizon. It makes the days longer, both in the rising and setting. And in astrology, we're not using where you see it. We're using its actual position, which is not affected by the atmosphere, the bending of light by the atmosphere. We're using a pure geometry of the cosmos on a larger scale, of which we are a part of it. So I'm just explaining to you that we don't do things visually in astrology. Numerous ways we don't, and it works. Because astrology is not primarily visual. It is geometry and vibration. Point number 3, we don't even use the actual positions of the planets. Here's a diagram. I've got the source for this image. This is where the planets were on a particular day when they were, almost all visible. So this astronomer made this image of the sky, and this yellow curve is the ecliptic plane. It's the path of the sun, and this ecliptic plane is the zodiac. That when you make a chart wheel in astrology, excuse me, or a square wheel if you're a Vedic astrologer, whatever. You put the planets in there. You're not using the actual planets. Like the moon is up here. See, it says moon. And we project it. We make believe it's on the ecliptic plane. We just drop them onto the ecliptic plane. We're not using the actual positions. We're using a fictitious position that's projected onto the ecliptic plane. That's what we do. So when you go and you point to, if you see Mercury at night or some other planet or Jupiter or whatever, that's not the point we use. The point we use is actually a few degrees away very often. So 1 degree is about the width of one finger. Your fist is about 5 degrees. I mean, that's pretty significant. It's a little bit different. And the orbs and everything are different. We're not using the actual planets. Another example that what we do is not visual. Astrologers can say it over and over again and say ancients did visual. They can say it as much as you want. Just ain't so. Third example. And this is, by the way, what we do is actually a form of dimension reduction. It's somehow the astrologers had this sensitivity that later becomes articulated and developed in modern times and called dimension reduction. Fourth way, excuse me, the zodiac is created by patterns of prime numbers and paisano periods that are embedded in spin and anchored to points determined through dimension reduction. It has nothing to do with the constellations or physical objects. So that's a mouthful. I have dozens of videos that explain this. Why is there a zodiac at all? What are these 12 signs? We have a complete, comprehensive, beautiful, elegant understanding of it. Fits everything together. That zodiac signs and houses are structures in space. They are not emanations from constellations. And the sidereal zodiac is created by resonances within the tropical zodiac. I know all this may sound overwhelming or even a little bit crazy, but we've worked it out in detail. We understand this. So a lot of theory, a lot of understanding, going way beyond what people currently understand astrology, has already been developed. It's explained in tremendous detail in many hours of videos, in dozens of videos. So why is Regulus the heart of Leo and give this royal quality of whatever it gives? We've actually done research. One of our researchers, Starlene Brighter, has done research on Regulus. It has a clear effect, according to our research, not exactly royal or regal. And that is probably coming because of the way it's situated in these structures in space. It's in the structures in space, the vibrations that are underneath astrology. It takes some time to get used to this because we become enamored with the physical world even though we don't use it, even though we don't pay attention to refraction of light, even though we project the planets onto the ecliptic plane, even though we have a zodiac that's based on abstract pure geometry. It still takes a while for people to realize that that's what we're doing. And the astrology we use that works is based on that. So astrology had strong visual elements when it was a divinatory practice in ancient Babylonia. Since about 400 BC, with the development of the zodiac, which only came around then, right around the time of the flowering of Euclid's geometry, which was probably around 300 BC. So within about 100 years, right in that same time range, all these things are developing. The understanding of prime numbers and Euclid's geometry, the formulation of this clearly, the development clearly of the zodiac and other ideas in astrology, all based on the same concepts. Kepler was correct. If we go to the geometry that existed before creation, we are able to discover how the universe works. Mathematics does indeed have unreasonable effectiveness, as the scientists say. We don't know why. It's a mystery, as Wigner said. We have no understanding why it works so well, but it does. And it works incredibly well in astrology. It has advanced astrology to this whole new level. So the future of astrology is not so much in the heliacal rising of a planet, which means the first time a planet is visible to the human eye, as it is in understanding the underlying geometry, which is now understood to be largely in vibrational planetary configurations. There might be some importance to the heliacal rising, but what I'm saying is the more you concentrate on what's visual, if you're going to do that, you should use refraction of light. You might want to use the actual positions of planets. I don't know if you want to use the ascendant or midheaven because they're pure geometry. The fact is we're dealing with a geometry, a sacred geometry that according to Kepler was there before creation. The more you do that, the more revelations, the more insights, the more discoveries. And we've transformed astrology to a completely new level that data scientists, that investors, business people are excited about it. It works. Come join the fun. It's built on the same things you've been studying forever in astrology. Well, that's it, my friends. I'm at 35 minutes. I like to keep this to about a half hour, so pretty close to it. So there you have it. why geometry and vibration are at the heart, the core, the source of astronomy, not usually said, and astrology. And with that simple understanding, you can appreciate this whole new development that looks and sounds a little bit different from other forms of astrology. And that's the beauty of it. That's the excitement. That's the paradigm shift. That's the new world we are entering. Okay, my friends, thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.